Hello Mzansi, welcome back to Farmers Inside Track. I am your host Patricia Tembo, and welcome to this episode proudly brought to you by Netafim. Today we're looking at the benefits of Netafim's drip irrigation, and we have Richardt Scholtz, who is an agronomist for Netafim Southern and East Africa, and he'll also unpack why it's important to understand soil water movements. Richardt Scholtz, welcome to Farmers Inside Track. We're excited to have you on today's episode.
Hi, Patricia. Thank you for having me.
Yes, so Richardt, as an agronomist for Netafim Southern and East Africa, you, better than most, know the benefits of drip irrigation and understanding water movement in soil, which is our topic today. So let's start off with the importance of water movement. Why is understanding water movement in soil so important for irrigation success, especially in South Africa, in the Southern African countries where we have water scarcity? Why is understanding water movement important?
In today's time, farmers are a bit limited on water availability, or farmers don't have the same amount of water available, but they do have the land. And if you're a farmer, you want to use that land to the utmost potential that you can, and you want to use your water to its full capacity. So if you understand your soil and your irrigation system well, you can actually use that water to the right amount so that you don't waste any water, and then also don't waste any land that could have been irrigated, but you didn't use the water efficiently enough in areas where you could have irrigated. So if a farmer will understand his soil, what type of soil it is, what's going in the profile, it will definitely help him and give him more possibilities on his own farm.
And of course, as an agronomist, you're working with farmers day to day. Have you seen farmers knowing this knowledge improve their water use efficiency?
Yes. So as an agronomist, we see a lot of farms and we see a lot of different farms, and out there is a lot of success stories. And I've seen farmers that didn't understand in the beginning how water moves in the soil or understand scheduling of irrigation, because scheduling is important. And after they understand the concept and understanding their soils and talking to more people, it makes a big difference, and they see it in their crop. I've seen orchards that you could see that the trees wasn't very healthy. Everybody thought it's the efficiency of nutrients, but sometimes it's over-irrigation or under-irrigation, and that can have a big impact on your crop if you don't irrigate correctly.
And we'll touch on that a little later. But still, speaking to, the farmer perception on soil water, what misconceptions have you come across? Because, with farmers, sometimes they like to stick to tradition rather than scientifically backed farming practices. In your experience and your practice, have you come across farmers who maybe have the wrong idea about how soil water works and the dynamics of it?
Yeah. Also what I've seen is farmers assume that the whole farm is the same and that all the crops need exactly the same amount of water. The soil types is not going to differ. So let's irrigate each block the same amount of water. And it is not as simple as that. You can't just irrigate different fields and different crops the same amount of irrigation hours. Unless they don't go do the research or go deep profile pits, and we'll touch a bit on that as well, to understand what is going on the farm in the different areas. So that's something that I think farmers must give a bit more attention to, and they are doing these days.
And I suppose now we can actually unpack soil water dynamics. If you could explain how infiltrability, hydraulic conductivity, water retention, and porosity interact with each other, what this means for a farmer, why they should even care about it. If you could just go into that.
So in soil, we talk about the texture of the soil, and the texture is mainly it's a composition of percentage of silt, clay, and sand, and how these compositions in the soil play a role on the texture class of the soil. So you would have heard that people talk about a loamy sand soil or a clay soil or a heavy soil or a light soil. So a clay soil is a smaller particle than sand. And if you have now a lot of clay in your soil, that's a smaller particle. You've got a lot of smaller pores in the soil versus a sand profile where the particles are bigger, there will be bigger pores. So the forces, gravity will have different impact on the sandier profile than the clay profile. And these spores is very important because it's also for oxygen in the soil for the roots. So typically when you will irrigate, water will move quicker through the sandier profile with the bigger pores than in a clay profile. And because the particles are closer in the clay profile, we talk about the capillary action, the water can move upwards and horizontal in a clay profile much easier than in a sandier profile. And what this then also lead to is that in a clay soil, the soil will hold the water a bit stronger to the particles. And we're talking about of a higher water holding capacity versus a sandier profile. And this is important when you irrigate your crop because the clay soil can hold the water now much longer than the sandy soil. The frequent irrigations that you have to do is going to differ. And a farmer needs to understand that you can't irrigate a sandier profile the same as a clay or heavier soil because of these dynamics in the soil.
You touched on the soil texture. There's a diagram, I believe, where farmers can determine what soil type that they have. Soil classification diagram, which I'm assuming would help in determining how to go about irrigation. Speaking about drip irrigation technology that Netafim has, how does it impact now the soil oxygen levels and water uptake efficiency? Like how would you use drip irrigation when it comes to irrigating the soil with those factors you've mentioned in mind?
With drip, you can actually irrigate precise what the plant needs at that time in its growing phase. So the water is now coming out at one specific point in the form of a droplet. So it's filling the profile, if we can say, of the soil very slowly. So let's say the soil is now dry and we start to irrigate. So we get different flow rates of drip. But if it's now, let's say 1 liter an hour, the droplet starts from the top and it starts filling now the soil underneath the dripper. And eventually, like I said earlier about the capillary action and the gravitational force, the water is now moving downwards and sideways. So picture the shape of an onion underneath this dripper. As the water is moving down, it goes slightly to the side. And as gravity gets a bit more and the profile, the pores getting full, the water moves a bit down and go a bit deeper. And at a certain point, the water can hold a certain amount of water. That's a calculation that you can do to be very exact. But now you want to understand where is your feeder roots in and at what depth is that? Because it's no point to irrigate where there's no roots. And your feeder roots is using all the nutrients and the water uptake there is much quicker than your deeper roots. They also use water, but much slower than your top roots, that way. Now, if you irrigate, you fill this down the right amount there and you put the irrigation off. That soil starts to dry out. The plant is starting to use the water. So as it's using the water, that pot that I explained shrinks. As it's getting dry, it's getting smaller and smaller. But then we don't want to get to a point where it's too dry. Otherwise, if soil gets too dry, the roots can't take up the water, or there's not enough water, or it gets held by the soil too strongly. Then we fill it up again. So constantly you allowing the soil, I can almost say, to breathe, because you're filling it with water and it's slowly shrinking in, and then you fill it up again, slowly shrinking in, filling it up again. We underestimate the importance of the oxygen in the soil because it's vital for the roots and for the plant for different processes and important to take up nutrients. So if you're going to over irrigate and saturate the soil and there's no oxygen, but you're still giving fertilizer, it's actually pointless because you're wasting the fertilizer. So oxygen is very important in the soil. And just to add a bit, you must remember now, we're not irrigating the full surface from the top. It's at one point where the dripper is.
You've explained that really well for farmers listening. And I think just to draw it all in, actually explaining how the drip irrigation works. We touched earlier on the soil properties, soil characteristics, texture, and how all that would influence how you are using the drip irrigation and adjusting it. Maybe if you have a few tips at hand on how a farmer can use the drip irrigation in terms of adjusting flow rates, etc., with the properties that they've now identified about their soil. So like they know they're working with a sandy loam soil. How would they go about determining what flow rate to use? Is this something Netafim supports agronomists like yourself? Like how would they go about it now?
Yeah, we do go out to the fields with the farmer. We've got bucket tests that we use where we can put them in the field, where we mimic the dripper to see what depth and width the water will move in the profile in the soil. We can help a farmer with that. But also I also find that farmers already have a system in place and they don't know if they had the right flow rate, or maybe they have the wrong flow rate of dripper, but now they have to use with what they've got. And to do that, they will always, first price is to make a profile pit underneath the dripper. And with that, you can see where that pot or onion bulb shape of the water underneath the dripper, you can see that. And you can also see where the roots is. If there's plenty of roots in that wet zone underneath the dripper, it's a good indication that the farmer is on the right track with his irrigation, because there would have been a lot of oxygen as well. But if he over-irrigate, you would typically see that the roots move away outwards to find the oxygen and to move out of the saturated zone. So the trees will also give you a sign of what's going on. But normally it's too late. When a tree, for instance, show diseases or that is not well, then the over-irrigation already started a while ago, because over-irrigations happen slowly. Farmer think he's doing a good thing to the plant to irrigate every day, but he doesn't realize he's actually over-irrigating after a few weeks or months. So if you can open the profile, then you can look and see, is it wet deep down? If you pass that, feeder roots, how wet is it down there? And even if you put the soil in your hand and you give it a few squeezes and you can immediately see some water, and then you know it's already over-irrigated. And then to regularly do a auger test. I mean, you auger, I would say, away from the dripper, underneath the dripper, to see how far does the water go and how wet is the profile. And if you notice that it's, for instance, very wet and it's a clay, heavy soil, then you must bring your irrigation hours down. We talk about pulse irrigation, so you don't have to put all the amount of water at one time, or you can maybe irrigate every third day or every second day. But rather bring the hours down and figure it out. It's not like an overnight thing that you can understand the soil. It takes a bit of time, but after a while you understand how the soil reacts to 1 hour irrigation versus 5 hours of irrigation. So you work with what you've got to make it practical again.
And I'm glad you've already touched on to what we were going into next now, which was monitoring and managing irrigation. You were speaking about over and under irrigating, which I think we can go into just a little bit more. You spoke of the signs already, over irrigating and under irrigating. So now a farmer has realized that they're either under irrigating or over irrigating. Is there a way to correct this?
Yeah, so if he then do the inspection in the field and start looking at where he is with the irrigation, like let's say now he did over irrigate. Yes, then he must stop the irrigation, go auger every day until he can see. But the soil is now moving to field capacity or below field capacity. And that might sometimes take 3 days or longer. But then, now my soil is at the right moist that I want it to be. There's enough oxygen and moist in the profile. And now I can start irrigating a bit less hours to get it right again. But there's also technology that we've got today. Farmers can also have a bit more information, a guideline more or less on how many hours to irrigate or what the demand of the plant is. That can also be a tool to guide them. But it's still important just to check in the soil. Are you on the right track?
I'm sure with yourself as an agronomist, this is also information that a farmer who's working with Netafim is able to access. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So we will guide them with that and help where we can with it. So there's different tools to use and Netafim can assist them with that.
Looking at technology and innovation now, Netafim often speaks about the science beneath the surface. I think that's a pretty cool phrase. How does drip irrigation integrate the soil, of course, but also plant data to optimize irrigation? So how do they work together, like the soil dynamics with the actual crop that the farmer is working with?
Different plants have different need for amount of water at certain times in the growing phase. With technology and all the data and information we've got, we can do a theoretical calculation of what, for instance, an avocado tree, when it's in flower versus when there's fruit on. So the demand of water is different. And then also the areas in the country differ as well on the weather patterns. And we talk about evapotranspiration or the ETO. It's warmer in certain areas. At the same time, in another place in the country, or other farm, it's a bit cooler. So the demand of those two crops will be different because the temperatures are different for that month in that area. But you can, like through weather stations and stuff, get that information for your farm. But If you've got that information, you know the crop you've got, the growing stage it's in, and then you go look into your soil. So you have to put that water down into your soil at the right amount that the soil can still handle. Because it's pointless to know that this plant needs today 4 millimeters of water, and I put all 4 millimeters down at once, but the plant can't take it up because it's maybe a sandy profile and it's running right down through the profile into a deeper zone where there's no feeding roots. So that's why it's important then to combine theoretical knowledge with the soil to put the water in that zone that it's available for the plant. So that's why I say different farms, you will actually have to adjust. You're going to play around. You're going to auger a bit regular in the beginning and do profile pits just to see that you're on the right track and make sure that the plant is happy.
You are, of course, working with farmers all the time. It's a part of your job. So you have seen success stories, with drip irrigation, and farmers understand their soil water dynamics. Could you maybe share an example of where you've seen a farmer's yield actually improve and their water efficiency also improve?
Yeah, so we had an instance where a farmer, the trees were dropping fruit and the leaves wasn't looking very good. And the farmer didn't know what the problem could be. And we started to open these make profile pits to see what's happening underneath the soil. And what we picked up is they had a sandy profile and they were irrigating long hours without understanding what's happening in the soil. And it was a sandy profile, and that water went down, let's say, to a depth of 800 centimeters. And over the time, they build up there. And if you open the soil up here at 20, 30 centimeters, everything looks fine. But down deep, it was actually very wet. So we had to shorten the irrigation hours, and that made a big impact because, again, it was a sandy profile that cannot handle long irrigation hours. And so in that case, we changed it, and you could see how the trees actually recovered from that. It was actually nice to see.
So, of course, you're speaking of trees. So I'm assuming that the roots go really deep. And as you said, when you dig about 30 to 40 centimeters, you don't notice that the soil would have been oversaturated from the long irrigation period. So just to get more out of the story, does that mean once the farmer realized that where the actual roots are, it's oversaturated? Was that the issue?
Yes, so they irrigated past the feeding roots, and then we started to focus to keep it into that 40, 50 centimeter depth where most of the roots was. Of course, remember, now again, if you put everything together, the farmer he's applying fertilizer through the drip, and fertilizer there's a cost to it, and you want to make sure that everything works optimum. And if you put fertilizer down, you want to make sure it's in the right zone. You want to put it there when the soil moisture is correct so that the plant can take it up, and you're not wasting any fertilizer that you wash past the root zone. So we kept it in that zone. You always now and again have to give a longer irrigation to wet the deeper zone. We call it the buffer zone, but not as frequent. But the feeder roots, they use much more water.
Thanks, Richardt. And just to wrap up, I can ask you now about partnerships between farmers, researchers, and technology providers. How do you see those partnerships working to help farmers improve water movement and irrigation success? Is there a need for farmers, researchers, and, technology providers like Netafim to work together, in your opinion?
I think it's important to all play a role in a bigger picture, and we all need each other in the industry. Especially for farmers, they get very busy on a farm. They don't always have time for all the detailed stuff. But it's important to know what new technology is out there, that there is support out there. Like in our case, the farmer can give us a call and we can have a chat and help as far as we can. Sometimes the farmers, the only reference I got is their neighbor, but sometimes it's good to see what other growers, other areas is, for instance, doing. And like you said, there's a lot of success stories, and it's important that the researchers and trials and data, farmers also have access to this and to see the benefit of what you get of farming this way, or getting your scheduling correct, or saving water, being more efficient with your water usage.
Thank you, Richardt. So you've walked us through the benefits of Netafim's drip irrigation technologies, and with that, the importance of understanding the water movement in soil, which you've unpacked really well. I'm wondering if you have any last words, anything else you'd like to add for farmers listening, perhaps?
For a farmer, there's a lot of technology out there. It's always important to go and dig those profile pits, be in the field, and just always go check, am I on the right track with my irrigation? Because you don't want to irrigate 1 hour every day, over-irrigate an hour every day, and then end of the month, you over-irrigated 30 hours. So just try to understand the soils and it will get easier and you'll get good results.
Thank you so much to Richardt Scholtz, who is an agronomist for Netafim, Southern and East Africa. For more information about Netafim's drip irrigation technology, you can definitely visit www.foodforumzansi.co.za. And that is the end of today's episode. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. From me, Patricia Tembo, our technical producer, Megan van der Vent, and the rest of #Team Food Forum Zanzi. Thank you for listening.